Welcome to the 200th episode of the Sendcast. And as always, I am Dale Pickles, the host of the Sendcast and the managing director of B Squared. If you are a new listener, you've probably just heard you've got another 199 episodes to catch up on. But either way, welcome to the Sendcast. This podcast has now been running for over 4 years and has had over 300,000 downloads around the world, which is absolutely amazing. So thank you to all our listeners and amazing guests. And the aim of the Sendcast is still exactly what it was, which is about educating as many people about special educational needs and disability as possible. We want to make the world more inclusive. And this week, in our 200th episode, we thought we would do something different. So this week, we're going to be discussing school attendance. It's a very big topic at the moment. And I'm discussing this not one, but 3 guests. In the first corner I'm going to choose, I'm in one corner. Next corner is going to be Suzy Rowland. And Suzy is an author of books supporting pupils around autism, ADHD, and non-attendance. In the next corner, we have Fintan. Fintan has been a head teacher, lecturer for Leicester University, and now works as a trainer and consultant for schools and school support systems. And in our final corner, we have Sarah Jane Critchley. And Sarah Jane is a regular on this podcast, like Fintan, and she is also an author, speaker, consultant, and coach. So lots of conversation coming up. The Sendcast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. We help schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make, and we help schools do this for a wide range of abilities and ages. And if you're a primary school struggling to show progress or struggling to identify where people isn't making progress, then we can help. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software. Now, let's get on with the 200th episode. Woohoo! On this week's show, we are discussing school attendance. It's been a really big topic over the last few months, and we thought we'd give it some airtime. I have a number of guests with me this week. Each one is bringing something unique to the conversation. First of all, I have Suzy Rowland. Suzy is the founder of the Happy in School project, an author of books supporting pupils around autism, ADHD, and non-attendance. And she has written 3 books, Send in the Clowns, I Can't Go to School, and also a poetry collection. Welcome to the show, Suzy.
Thank you, Dale. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Fintan O'Regan is next, or Finn. Finn is a trainer and consultant for schools and school support systems, including social services, health, the police, and foster carers. And he focuses on neurodiversity, behaviour, and prevention of school exclusion. And before he did all of this, he was a head teacher of a specialist school supporting ADHD, ASD, and ODD. Welcome to the show, Fintan.
Good morning, everybody.
And finally, we have Sarah Jane Critchley from Different Joy Partnership. Sarah Jane was previously the Programme Manager for the Autism Education Trust, and she is currently part of the National Autism Trainer Programme, working with the NHS to improve mental health services for autistic people. And Sarah Jane's daughter, Beth, didn't have the typical route through school, but has recently graduated from university. So welcome to the show, Sarah Jane.
Hello.
And we have 4 people in the studio, remotely anyway. So early this year, the DfE launched a school attendance campaign to try and boost attendance in schools, and it's received a lot of criticism, trivialising some of the reasons children don't attend schools and completely ignoring pupils with SEND and or mental health. So who wants to go first? Who's going to dive in?
Shall I go first? So I saw that campaign and I thought, why are they doing this? And underneath that is an assumption that the best place for all children to be is in school.
Yes.
And for the vast majority of young people, it is a good place to be. However, that really doesn't help the population of young people whose needs are not being met. So school can meet the needs of some pupils. I would argue that the pupils whose needs are being met seems to be getting narrower and narrower and narrower.
Yes.
In terms of how that works. And it's a very different experience the way it was when I was at school. and when we were at school, most of us. I think it's much more difficult for young people to be in schools now. And I think the pressure on individual pupils is much higher. I think the pressure on individual teachers is much higher. I think the pressure on individual head teachers is much higher. I think there are structural issues with the system. And what happens is that pressure kind of filters down and gets heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier and lands on the people with the least power in the system, which are the pupils. And then they get squidged at the bottom.
I think that summarises it. We can end now. But it's exactly that. It's the people who have no voice. And their only voice is to not... basically, they will go until they can't.
I think that's a great way of putting it, Dale. I mean, I think, the term school avoidance, it's interesting. The linguistics around the term have changed over the years. We started off with truancy, then it became school refusal and avoidance, and now we have non-attendance. I like to use the word school distress because even anxiety is a complex descriptor. You can have general anxiety disorder, social anxiety. What is school anxiety? What is school phobia, which isn't actually the right use of the term? What is the fear that's causing the child to not be able to go to school? And I think that it has become, as Sarah Jane indicated, so political and so fragmented that all of that disjointedness sort of falls onto the heads of the family, and all of that stress is within that microcosm of the family, which is hugely damaging. And I think to look at it as a homogenous social condition is really missing the point. It's missing all the complexity around individual situations. And I'll give an example. Even though the data looks at the Connolly data looks at the figures of non-attendance being, it's sort of 92% of those non-attending are neurodivergent and 83.4% are autistic. But I was at a specialist school earlier this week. The majority of neurodivergent, autistic young people with a range of mental health conditions. So they ideally should be in a setting where they have all their needs met. And I was discussing, some support for a couple of the girls there. And they seem to be having very good support from that school setting. And I was just sort of probing and, so what's the situation? And then I was told, well, there could be issues at home. What does that mean? Well, the home is not fit for purpose where they live. It's a very dilapidated property that the local authority perhaps shouldn't even have anyone living in. So when we're looking at, her attendance is about 30%. And she's in a really supportive, specialist environment. So just as an example, the issues are so complicated. And in addition to that, because of her home setting, she's very anxious about leaving home and worrying about what's going to happen to the house. Is the ceiling going to collapse? So these are really serious, complicated, complex issues that, in a way, lumping it all together as school non-attendance doesn't even begin to explain some of the nuances of what's happening in individual families.
I found the way they chose to deliver the message with those images of this morning he was worried about school, but look at him now. Or this morning he had a runny nose, but look at him now. It completely trivialized. As the reason we were going is because parents were being completely fussy, and parents, you need to just get on with it and kick them out into school. That's all that needs to happen, and we will fix everything. Is kind of the message it gave across. And that's, if you look at the numbers, Suzy, as you said, those numbers are not showing the same thing. Those numbers are not showing it's parents whose children have a runny nose and they're just keeping them off. Yeah, there is something going on. The schools are not meeting the needs for these children.
I suppose I'd like to sort of I concur with what the other guys have said. Although I would like to emphasise that when we sort of say the good old days, in the past, I'm not sure they were such good old days. I think there's a lot of very good practice right now. It's obviously it's not as good as we'd like it to be, but I think we're a lot more safeguarding is a lot better these days than it was in the past. I think we're a lot more aware of many of the diversities that possibly another generation ago we didn't have. I think we're better with gender, we're better with race, and we're getting there with we're trying to do better with neurodivergence. And so I think we have to say that there is a lot of good practice as well taking place across schools in the UK, and I think there's been some real major developments in meeting the needs of a number of pupils who wouldn't have been possibly in a mainstream school setting a generation ago. And I know that from being involved in special schools. Now, having said that, we've still got some major challenges, and if we look at you said about there's lots of reasons for why these things are taking place, but if we look at 15 years ago, we had an every child matters approach, and that was it was a very worthy and a very sort of what do you call it? It was a campaign to sort of try and meet the needs of every child. Now, what happens, of course, is that was when we went from the sort of inclusion the principles where we kind of shut down a lot of special schools and then we put everything into mainstream schools. And what happens, of course, is you get 2 or 3 years of major funding to try and bridge that, and then it all disappears, and all of a sudden you've got to make it up as you go along. And of course, the not having the alternative school options, which we used to have, is a major reason, I think, for why we are not able to meet the needs of all the children in mainstream schools. And then in my area of exclusion, of course, it's rocketed up over the last 7 or 8 years, and that is very much somewhat a political issue, because he now denies it. We had a behaviour czar that came in, Tom Bennett, who said quite publicly, the few should not affect the rights of the many. And that's what he said. And his approach towards that has been a mantra taken up by a number of heads and sometimes people within school systems, and that's given license, if you like, particularly in the area that I'm interested in, particularly in school exclusion, towards higher rates of using that process. And I keep on saying, I think people aren't still familiar with the fact that the biggest reason for school exclusion is not violence or drugs or anything like that. It's something called persistent disruptive behaviour. And you've got to have 45 days of continuously telling someone that they can't come to school. 45 days. If the second fixed term exclusion doesn't sort of achieve some kind of change of approach, how can the 7th, 8th or 9th continue to do that? And it happens year after year after year, and the numbers are increasing all the time. And I think, and we said before, as a child, they're the ones I see them, they go into school, they want to learn, but they can't, they need support. Then they get battered and bruised and told they can't come in. So then they move into I'm trying to learn, but I might, and then they move into a don't care. When they don't care, then why? What's for them? Why should they go in when they're just going to get kicked out again, and no one's going to make any changes to the reasons that we said we were going to try and do? So it's a complex issue, and it's great to have so many some people here today discussing it.
So on a recent podcast I did with Rachel Lofthouse, it was challenging the pedagogy of professional decline, and we discussed kind of the changing education system and basically this really big push towards efficiency. And when Sarah Jane, when you talk about the good old days, I think about going into school, and my teacher was in the class 5 days a week. They never seemed that stressed. There wasn't a TA. I felt valued. My report, my year 5 report was 2 sides of A4 handwritten about me. And I can read that report now and I look back and go, wow, he really got me. I look at my daughter's school and it is about efficiency. It's about the exams. Their school reports tell you nothing about the child. It is just everything about is efficiency and these pressures. And I think that's the sort of thing we really need to recognize. And one of the things I asked Rachel was, I wonder if there is data which could correlate kind of this drive towards efficiency and this disruptive behavior that everyone's complaining about. And she went, you don't need to ask, the data is there and you can correlate the two things. This drive towards efficiency, this moving towards a conveyor belt, this bit where children are just part of the system, they're just ushered in as groups and not taken into account as individuals, is causing this disruptive behavior, which is there. And why would you go in if you're not feeling valued?
So I've got a question that I'd like to ask the rest of you, because I don't know the answer. There is a theory in social systems that we're meant to exist in groups of around 200. That's kind of a human level of number of people we can interact with and feel known by and to know. And that when it gets beyond that, it becomes unworkable for our poor little prehistoric brains to get our heads around. What I see when we talk to our young people is they want a group of people who they know and are known by, and that could be their teachers, that could be their families, that could be their community outside. But it doesn't feel like in some of our larger schools, and I'm not talking about primary here because they tend to be much smaller, I'm talking about when we go to secondary, that they are of a scale that even when you have peer groups who get on, and that's by no means a given, it's by no means a given at all, that those people don't seem to stay together. So I'm not suggesting that in the past everything was wonderful and it was all glorious, because it wasn't, and some of the learning was frankly nowhere near as good as it is now. But if I think about my experience when I was at school, I had a group of people that I went right the way through in my class, because we were setted once and that was it. That set, you live and die with that set. You went through and did everything with them. Versus, whether you like them or whether you hate them, you were stuck with them. Versus what seems to happen now, which is the fragmentation of that social linkage, which for anybody who finds social really difficult is going to make that even harder. And I'm just wondering whether that might be feeding into what we're seeing.
I think that's an interesting analogy in terms of those social groupings and how much interaction we can sustain as individuals. But I mean, I think the big thing that's revolutionized education and learning and the social structures in schools is the access to technology. And, you know, I went into the specialist secondary school a couple of days ago, and when they go in, the girls are invited to leave their phones in a locker in reception. And I see that more and more in schools. There is, you know, you're allowed to go and get your phone at break time to check in if your parents have called or any emergencies or whatever. But the impact of technology in your hand, I mean, in your hand, you've got access to the whole world. And some of the issues around school absence have been described to me by young people as the inability to manage what's happening in their digital world and how that intersects with the world of school. So in terms of WhatsApp groups, seeing information that's sort of beyond what they're able to process emotionally, needing to be in the right groups. And there's groups within groups, there's digital groups, there's real groups in, you know, your actual friends. And then there's a whole tribe of activity that's happening that young person brings with them into their school experience. And all of the things that they may be troubled by or holding on to, and they want to speak to somebody, you know, a friend, and have a chat with somebody, you know, that's where they do a lot of that kind of sharing and downloading of all of the stuff that's troubling them. And it's almost like it's a bigger and more attractive pull in some ways than what the teacher standing up in front of them is trying to do. And unfortunately, in some cases, some of the content, I mean, we've all heard the well-publicised cases of young girls and boys. And it does spill into the classroom. So that is another big reason why a proportion of our young people, and obviously if you're neurodivergent and you're very motivated and rewarded by the things that you're seeing or the space you're in, and you're on your social group online, it can be often that is your main social group, which is more easy to access than trying to develop friendships face to face. So that is a huge, massive cultural shift that's happened in the last 20 odd years that I think has no doubt shaped how children are feeling at school and whether they want to go to school and what their experience of school is.
I'm just going to absolutely second technology because for me, when you left school when I was young, good day, bad day, being bullied, not being bullied, when you walked out that school, it paused. It paused until you got back to school the next day. Now it continues 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, digitally. And that's the thing with digital, you can't escape it. And you have these children who hate what's going on, but they can't stop looking at it and things like that. But touching on what you said, Sarah Jane, is you talked about how the education, what the learning is so much better, but it's kind of, it's that cost of have we emphasized that so much at the cost of other things? And the other thing I just want to wondering is that 200 person rule. I wonder if they did the research, what would that be for you neurodivergent? Would it still be 200 or would it be more like 20?
Can I just jump in just to, and I would like to go. I think going back to that issue we've just discussed, I think we're all on the same page. When I do my training, I'm asked to go in and talk about behaviour, where I say, well, we'll get to behaviour, but what we need to talk about initially is learning and socialisation. Because if we don't get the learning right, then you're going to get behaviour issues. If you can't at least have some degree of, you can't change it, but you're influencing or keeping an eye on the socialisation issues, they're not going to, their behaviour is going to change. So they're either going to, they're going to act out or they're going to stay away. Which is, and as you said, the reasons for that are very different now. And there's always been bullying, but bullying, as you said, now is an area I concentrate on a lot in schools, because if you feel unhappy, then why would you go to school? And we were discussing offline early on that why do kids go to school? And when you're under 11, you get taken there and you have to. But when you're 11 on, you're making your own way there, really. So you can either go in or not. You go in to see your friends. So if you don't have friendships, or you're feeling threatened, or you're feeling intimidated, it's not going to be an incentive to go to school. But I think there's another couple of things to say, and it goes back to the community issue. I think as much as I said before, there are some advantages of what we're doing now, but I think one of the big differences over the last generation or so has been the change in which schools are organised. And every single school is its own kind of community. It's its own community, and it has its own rhythm. It has its own it has its own parental sort of, you've got your own community. They're all communities within a community. And what's happened, of course, is, with the change of LEAs to schools control to academisation, you've got group systems. And what happens in those group systems is that you get a group directive, which is then has to be employed by all of the schools within that system. Now, and I've seen some of these, like, for example, in behaviour systems, and someone's gone across and seen, I'm going to have this, so we're going to employ that. And it goes across a whole range of schools in different parts of the country. They're not even in the same area. There's some in Norfolk, and there's some in Birmingham, and there's some in, and so you're getting this thing. And so that, so you've got that directive, which might be effective for one or two schools that you might be in, but they're not effective for someone else, and everyone else is having to pick up that rhythm. And going back to this issue of, I have been to a few academy schools over the years, and I'm not saying that they are all not functioning very well. Some are functioning very well, but the pressure's on heads, and I see the heads briefing in the morning, and basically it is very results driven. And they are like football managers. They are really like football managers. and their jobs are dependent on whether or not they can get those results up. And that's the pressure they're under to try and compete with the other schools in the area. So when I went into a place, I was going in there under it was actually under the Every Child Matters umbrella, and the head was welcomed me in. But what she wanted to do was she wanted to find ways for me to reduce the amount of time that the SEN department was spending on kids. She wanted to reduce the number of staff so she could get someone else in who was more academic in order to move their results up. And I'm afraid so. There's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons, but some of them are institutionalized. But going back to the group thing, like I said before, I think that I don't know the stats on how many, but I do know the fact that they're not allowed to be those kind of communities that they used to be.
I heard an interesting phrase, which was almost like asking, is your school a school that is part of a community, or is your school a school that is plonked into a community? And I think going back years ago, that school was very much part of the community. And what you were just talking about, Fintan, there with those academies, and these are our rules, they are completely operating in a bubble within that community, and they're not part of that. They're not reflecting that community. They're reflecting some other organization's values.
Can I just, I was just thinking, Finn, when you talked about the way that schools are structured, and that's something that's very pertinent when I'm trying to talk to parents about potentially complaining about illegal exclusions, for example, or even find, what is I try to get to the grip of what is the culture of the school, what is the culture of the leadership. And I've had, it's quite difficult to explain that, you have a head teacher who is kind of like an executive head teacher. And many of not even large, but general, the MAT philosophy, the Multi-Academy Trust is about, at its very core, zero behaviour tolerance policy.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's the beginning and the end. And I've heard of parents in absolute distress when their child is externalizing their behavior, and they get told off and they get excluded, and eventually they'll stop going because they know that the avoidance, and I'm using that word as with all its nuance, is about self-protection. I know I don't feel safe in that place. I might be having a meltdown. And a lot of it is also about bullying of neurodivergent children. That's kind of the thing that we sort of skirt around when we talk about, we talk a lot about anxiety. There's a huge amount of bullying because, a child might be stimming, they might have a different vocal pattern, they might be, then the teachers will say, well, we've given them an exit card. Oh, that's another reason to bully my child. So it's like, we were expecting our children to go into quite a hostile environment, actually, and figure it out and build resilience. And generally, the young people that I work with are massively resilient. Sorry. And I think to a point where you think, are you being resilient, or are you masking until you have a complete meltdown and then and shut down, and then you're not able to go to school at all? Because that's the result, and I can see it from primary, and again, just anecdotally, I don't have any data, but I'm seeing more families coming of children who are struggling to get to school in year 6, and then they do the transition. That's very difficult to manage anyway, because they might be changing their social group. Big issue for all of our kids, but particularly the neurodivergent and all of those coming in from different boroughs or whatever. So by the time they get to year 8, and we see this shooting up of non-attendance, you can almost chart it.
You could. I'm sorry, I know you want to say. I just I'm going to Sarah. It's exactly what you say. It's the biggest ever transition you make from primary to secondary. It's huge. It's huge. It's much bigger than going to sixth form or going from sixth form to work. It's just huge. And the stats are as I mean, Dale will know this because we've done quite a lot on bullying. Bullying, I just make it. I put it up there as quick as much as I can in lights, because you're 3 times more likely to be bullied for neurodivergent than for any other reason, whether whether race or gender or tall or fat or small or whatever. You're 3 times more likely, so you are absolutely vulnerable. And so, therefore, it's something that we really are not getting to grips with. And it goes back to, I'm sorry to what you said, again, I'm sorry to agree with you on this one, this no tolerance policy. And that comes directly from this guy who was the behaviours are. There's not many people I really don't want to sort of, be open-minded with in education. But this is a man who's never been a head teacher. He was a teacher in a school, and he always says how, he always says it was in East London. So, how tough it must have been. And he always is quite proud in one of his jobs that he was a bouncer. And that's what he's doing now. He's a bouncer. He's bouncing people out of school. That's what he sees it. He wasn't a night. If you behave in a certain way, you're bounced out.
When you mention, neurodivergence is more of you're 3 times more likely. I would just add that if you happen to be neurodivergence plus female and or neurodivergence and black, then the statistics are. I
think it's high. yeah, you're right. Yeah.
If you're a 14-year-old black boy who's got ADHD, you're pretty likely to be excluded several times in your school career. So
add them being extra tall. Yeah. You're literally, we're playing poker now, and you got the royal flush.
I would completely, unfortunately, again, I hate to be able to concur with you on this, but it is true. It's true. It's true, and we're not saying that because it's not. I always tell the story though, but Dale got bullied at school by a teacher, actually, because he had a chap who had a surname Branston, and he used to sit them beside each other. So he used to put them there. So he used to do the register. He'd go down Smith, Jones, Jenkins, Branston, Pickles, and everyone laughed. Yeah, so happens in different ways. Sorry, Sarah, you were going to go.
So I wanted to just pick up a little bit about what happens when you have zero tolerance. So yes, you will absolutely have exclusion. That will happen because being a human who is operating in a human way and occasionally might forget something. You might forget a ruler. You may have ADHD and be unable to actually remember where your ruler is or where you put it. These systems do not allow people to be neurodivergent. And if we think about things like attendance awards, dear Lord, I hate attendance awards. And I passionately hate them because what it does is it rewards people who basically turn up at whatever price. And for some people, that will be really easy. And for some people, that will be catastrophic. And in the girls and women who are neurodivergent that I see the huge pain and fallout of them having masked and having been good girls, because lots of us are good girls because we know we're only safe if we're good girls. And we turn up and we try really hard and we do the right things and we're sitting there being really quiet, really compliant, doing all the rules because we feel safe in the rules. So we will do that. But at what cost? And the at what cost happens way down the line. And it happens in terms of interrelations with other people. It happens in terms of intimate relationships. It happens in terms of being bullied by other people. It happens in terms of exploitation. And it is absolutely worse if you have intersectional issues, whether they're race, whether they're gender, whether they're culture, whether they're language, whatever those may be, they all layer on top. So everything makes it worse. And I think one of the things that makes me actually incandescently cross is the prosecution of parents for children's non-attendance. Because we've got evidence from Coventry University, for example. So let's take an independent body. Coventry University looked at it and they said, if you prosecute parents for truancy, and they use the word truancy, they weren't saying emotionally based school avoidance or emotionally based school non-attendance, they were saying truancy. If you punish parents for non-attendance, what happens? So what you're doing is you're putting a punitive approach that leads to harm, they said, for parents, for children, and for vulnerable families. What's the outcome we want in terms of getting children into school? We want them to get into school so they can learn. We want them to get into school so they can understand how to work in our social world. We want them to come into school so that they can learn and be able to function and be able to earn and pay taxes and do all that wonderful social stuff that we all want people to have, and so that they can become the people they want to be. But the research found it was ineffective. So it punished families, it broke families, it caused trauma that it need not have done, and it actually didn't work in terms of getting children back into classrooms. So it doesn't work, and it causes harm. And by the way, because that impacts people disproportionately if they have special needs, if they are of a different colour, if they're of any protected characteristic, it is inherently discriminatory and cruel.
I'm just going to go back to the zero tolerance bit because I like my analogies, and we all mostly remember the days before call centres. Yeah, you'd go to your bank or whatever, yeah, and you talk to someone and you go, look, I'm in this situation, and that person had the power to have that conversation with you and make a decision. And then we turned into these call centres, we turned into company policies, and we all almost like hated all these organisations we had to work with. Because last year I could walk in here and ask this, and you would give me an overdraft because of this, and you knew me, blah, 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 and now I can't. And that's kind of what academisation, the way you kind of that zero, it's kind of that process again, isn't it? Where we had this school down the road last year, I could talk to them, or we could change all of this, we could have that conversation, and they were really supportive. They became an academy. That same person now cannot do this because it's zero tolerance and they're not allowed. And that's kind of what we are. And even now, we're still struggling with all these organisations and these call centres and how to actually do it. And COVID was a nightmare because everything went online and people working from home. It was horrible. And yet we're stuck with it. And I think academies in that sort of zero tolerance way, I hope we don't get stuck with it. I hope that there is enough pushback. I hope there is enough actually people wanting better. So there are some great academies out there. I've worked with some amazing academies. I've also seen some really bad academies making some really strange decisions. But I think just touching what you were talking about, Sarah Jane, was that why do we want children to go to school? There is a flip side of that. Why do families need their children to go to school? So they can earn money to pay for the house they're living in. Because if your child is at home, you need to be at home and you cannot work. And I'd love to be the situation that if your child is placed on a part-time timetable, then you will be refunded a similar level of the fines by the local authority or the government. Or if your child is excluded and then found out it wasn't actually done or they broke the rules, you again would get a similar reimbursement from the government in that. I'd love to be in that sort of situation. And it's a two-way thing, but it's never going to be that, is it?
I have a question actually, which is more, and I probably should know the answer to it. In terms of, I know we're talking about exclusion and avoidance somewhat being part of the same sort of thing, but the exclusion rates of boys to girls are obviously much higher. It's boys are more overt, we know, girls are more covert, and it's about 4-1, and we talk about the ratio in SEN being about 4-1 boys to girls, and I mean, we are slightly better now, as we know, looking at girls. We become used to be 9-1, 10-1, and we maybe got a question about staff later on today, and there could be some factors in there that from another generation never recognised. But what are the school avoidance in terms of avoidance issues? In terms of what's the ratio of boys to girls, in terms of that? If there's such a category of that, does anyone know? Because I don't know. In terms of refusing to go to school, Suzy, do you know? Or do you...
In terms of not being able to go to school,
yeah.
The data that I've come across, which I can't pull out in terms of the authorship, is about equal, actually, which is very interesting. Yes, so 50-50 across boys and girls. And in terms of the I mean, my client base is very varied, but I get referrals. Think very equal again, very equal. Funnily enough, I'm seeing a lot more families who have boys who are neurodivergent, who are seeking support with that interface with the school and understanding of what their neurodivergence is. and they're all also primary boys, actually. So that's just a weird thing. For a period of time, I was working mainly with girls, and their issues were because they were again, this is historic, but they tended to be late diagnosed. So they got to maybe GCSEs and all the pressure of having to perform again, that pressure cooker. And the girls probably hadn't had a chance to get used to what that diagnosis meant and the, processing it and all of that. And then, so there was a lot of that stress around the exam and then not being able to go in for that reason. But I would say it tends to be pretty 50-50, and I'm open to any other, people who may want to feed back in with any other data on that.
I think the gender thing, my experience of gender thing's interesting. So I think it's certainly in terms of exclusions, it tends to be more boys than girls. But in terms of non-attendance, I agree with you. I think it's more equal. But I'm also seeing a lot more mental health issues in girls and women, and I'm seeing a lot more eating disorders, behaviours type experience and demonstration in terms of girls and women. That tends to be more female than male. It's not that male don't, it's just that the balance is switched the other way. And that area is growing massively, particularly in the older teenage population.
I think that you said earlier, Sarah Jane, about that must be a good girl. And I think there is that thing, boys can be disruptive. They're allowed to be kind of when they're younger. So it comes out again and they do go down this maybe disruptive route and they become non-attenders because they're kind of clashing so much with the school. Whereas I think with the girls, it's a very different route. It's probably more of that burnout of coping and hiding it all, and then it all suddenly coming out. Emily Katie was on the podcast not long ago, got 10 A stars at GCSEs, and then spent the next 6 months in a CAMS unit because she burnt out, because they said to her, try the best you can, which to her was you do everything you can while you're awake to get your... And so I think for the boys, it's that disruptive route, but I think the girls, it is that hiding it. You must conform, you must do this, burning out, I think. So probably equal numbers, but very different routes and way they appear. So,
and the other issue is, I'm sorry is that, I mean, I knew about the eating disorder ratio. It's about 4 or 5 to 1 girls to boys. And I think there's no doubt that the relationship with that and undiagnosed or masking of ASD is crucial in that. But I think it's the bullying as well, isn't it? The bullying style of girls versus boys. The girls' bullying is that much more insidious. It's much more along sort of, more strategic. Boys don't do the same type of bullying. Boys are, they'll beat you up or extortion type thing, whereas girls is a much more social exclusion, social isolation, I think, process, I believe. So I think that's possibly one of the other. But I'm not completely surprised about the ratio being about 1 to 1. It's definitely something that I think we need to think a long, hard look about, and how to sort out bullying is complex, because there's that hidden curriculum that we used to all know when we were there, and it's what they're going through, right? But we can't just turn the other cheek. We can't avoid it, and we need to do much more about the social systems. And also the other thing is, without boring you too much, about grouping them, based on their age, is not necessarily correct for everybody. We need to, we always say with someone with ADHD, they are developmentally at least 2 or 3 years behind their peers with self-regulation and focusing. And it might be 3 or 4 years above when it comes to problem solving and some of their verbal skills. So we've got to start thinking differently about grouping them as well in school, just based on their age. So there's lots of things to think about.
I'm just going to add in that whilst having a conversation about neurodivergence and transition to adulthood, I think we need to be mindful as well of the numbers and the complexity around gender identity in this group. And, referring to boys and girls we need to just take care in how we discuss that, because I've also encountered young people who are gender curious, and that's also part of their individual journey as a neurodivergent person. And I think that there needs to be, sort of care needed, because that's sometimes part of the avoidance issue. And it's one of those things where sometimes it isn't an issue that is even necessarily the young person is necessarily conscious of or able to speak to their parent or trusted adult about. So that's one of the things. I did a whole list of things in my book. I Can't Go to School. There are many, many, many complex issues, and I think the complexity is part of the challenge in the resolution. And the other thing, just going back to what we discussed earlier around the punitiveness of, for children and young adults who aren't able to attend. Obviously, the government change in August this year is going to be that parents are going to be fined £80. I think it's for a consecutive 10 days, consecutive 5 days, but 10 sessions missed. If they've missed 10 sessions, £80, and if they're able to pay it within 21 days, and if it's after 21 days, it will go up to £160. And I was reading this. I have come across a couple of parents who have experienced that punitive approach to what's already a distressing situation. And it was like reading. I get many parking fines because I am the person that sometimes forgets where I've parked, and it's part of my profile, which I won't labour. But it was like reading a thing about parking fines. You'll get paid this, and if you pay it within this amount, and I just had to do a double take, and to think about this distress, and there is a cohort of adults who are not really cognizant with these issues. And I've also heard parents say, in settings not related to the work I do, just in general conversations, oh, so and so's child isn't able to go to school. I think she just needs to drop him off and run away, sort of thing. He'll be okay. He'll get over it. And there are some parents who think this. So that kind of builds in a level of shame in the parent whose child is going through that. Because if there are other parents who are, maybe influenced by the campaign, Attendance Matters campaign, and they might not understand. So that makes you feel like as a parent, somehow you're not succeeding, you're not getting it right as a parent. So not only have you got your child's anxiety issue, social issues, whatever, to contend with, you've also potentially got the judgment of other parents who may not understand what you're going through.
We've been here before, and it didn't work then, and it won't work. I started off with ABC, ASBOs, ABCs, accessible behavioural contracts. You couldn't in some housing associations, if you couldn't manage your child in the evening, you lost your accommodation. So we've tried this before, and it's a blunt instrument. It didn't work in the past, and it won't work now. It's just, I'm afraid, a bit of a headline grabber. To appease the people who think, oh, these people are getting away with it. And here's the thing: if you have neurodivergent children, I can tell you, if you have a child who's got ADHD, who's neurodivergent, it's 80% likely the parents will have traits themselves. So you've got to be supporting families, not punishing them and penalising them. And I like your thinking about your parking ticket, Suzy, is quite interesting. Can I tell you a quick anecdote? So I was just being really mean. So it was about 4 weeks ago on a Sunday. It's a £2 all day parking thing if you go in and to the centre. So I went to the machine and I saw a bloke coming out to his car, and I said, "Oh, can I give you £1 for that?" And he said, "No, you have it for free," type thing. So I had this £2 parking ticket, which I got for free. And when I was going home, I saw this bloke go to the machine. I said, "Oh, I've got a parking ticket here. You can have it." He goes, "I'll give you £1." So what I should have said was, no, I'm not going to take that £1, but I did take the £1. So I got a free parking spot and I got £1. That was a good day.
Shocker.
It's hard to do that these days because they're all doing Ringo, easy
Yeah.
number plate or whatever.
I know.
Those are the
So
days.
my funny anecdote, Finn, was actually because I can be prone to not quite remembering where I've parked or taking longer than I have paid for. I now have Ringo because I just couldn't manage the whole time. I parked somewhere and I was really, really determined, and I just said in the shop, I've got to go, sorry, I'll come back. I think it was a dry cleaners, and I left it, went back to my car, and I was it is actually quite funny. This will paint a very funny visual image. I was carrying a melon, a really heavy melon, and I saw the traffic warden approaching my car. So I was sort of yelling at him, wait, I'm just here, I'm just behind you, with this huge melon, trying to run before he got to my car and gave me a ticket. And when he got there, he still gave me a ticket. And I said, well, what are you doing? I'm back in time. What I hadn't realised is I'd put the parking ticket the wrong way up. So it was completely blank. There was no time showing. So I still failed.
Oh, no. I thought you were going to say you fell over and hit him with your melon.
I know. That's what's going with the melon. I'm going, where's this going? Where's this going? Is she going to hit the traffic warden?
Exactly.
Persistently bad melon behaviour.
Yes, exactly. How mean was that parking attendant?
Well, I appealed actually, and I said, look, I genuinely meant to be back by the right time, and so I appealed and said, I did explain my ADHD. It is, we know about the ADHD tax, and oh boy, have I paid it, not just in parking fines. And I explained, and I did actually get that fine refunded.
Did you? Oh,
I can't guarantee it happens every time, people, but
yeah, and the problem will be that that's great. It's just that we're punishing those parents who just are unable to. It's just, as I said before, it's a blunt instrument. It didn't work before. It won't work now.
So can I just pick up and follow up from that? So there was a really good survey from Not Fine in School. Sorry, we can come to you in a moment, Dale. I'm going to control the room for this one moment. And they did 2 surveys. The first survey looked at the experience of parents who are trying to get their children into school. What happened if they made them go? Did it help? Did it make it worse? And the first survey found, actually, guess what? It made it worse. They did a follow-up survey and they found that, yes, it definitely made it worse. It didn't make it better. And I would challenge anybody to try and get a 14-year-old who's taller than you are out of bed, dressed and up the road without having a serious incident of somebody getting hurt. If you can even persuade them to open their eyes, how, just physically, how does one do that?
It's as you say, it puts that in so perspective, but it's someone's come out with a policy and they've rubber stamped it, but you're absolutely, that's the reality. Sorry, Dale, you may speak.
Thank you. Woohoo! I think it was just following on that little bit. I think it was Ali Knowles, or it might have been you, Sarah Jane, I cannot quite remember, who basically said, when you are in this zone, if you're trying to get your child into school, your relationship with your child is more important than being in school. Do not break that trust.
Yeah.
Because if you don't become their safe person, if you become that person putting them in that place that they do not feel safe, then that relationship is going to disappear and it's going to go really wrong. I now can't remember where I was going with this, but that was it. I've got it there.
So can I pick up on trauma? Because I think that it's really important that we actually do that. Because you'd forgotten where you were going, Dale.
I remembered it. It was just going to be like Suzy was talking about the kind of the neurodivergent children. Fintan touched on the probability of those parents being neurodivergent themselves. And those parents are probably dealing with the undiagnosedness and their undealt with trauma from when they were at school, when they were bullied, when they were unsupported, and et cetera, et cetera. So when they're looking at their child's education and going, it's fine, don't go to school because it won't get you anywhere because they won't look after you. You've got lots of that going around.
But I think, if we can pick up on the trauma bit.
Yes.
So if you are feeling unsafe, you're feeling unsafe at school because of something's happening in school or because of something's happening out of school, and it's a WhatsApp group and you're being excluded and all of that sort of thing socially or physically, and you're being forced into an unsafe place, what does a person do? What does a human being do? You either fight, flight, freeze, flop, or fawn. They're trauma responses. And by forcing someone into that, we're not helping them to do the build resilience thing. We're actually damaging them. And you can only build resilience from a safe place. You can't build it from a broken place. And it's so, so important that we create safe places for people to be. And sometimes, thank you for that amazing teacher who provides that place in school. There will be people like that who do that in the face of systems that may or may not support them. But it may need to be the parent. And I hear again and again when you go and you sometimes read the guidance and they say, oh, make school an unfriendly place. Sorry, make home a difficult place to be so that they want to be at school. Make home horrible so that they want to be at school so school's nice. Find the thing that they like to do and take it away. No, because actually, if you're having a really stressed, really pressured environment at school, you feel unsafe, you're holding it all together as much as you can, you need somewhere to recover. You need somewhere to be safe. You need someone to be safe with you. You need someone to co-regulate and to help you to get back to that sense of safety and okayness, because the consequence, if we don't do that, is that our people will leave. So there are two things. Sorry, Dale, can I just finish this one thought because it's really important. The two things that lead to increased levels of suicidality in neurodivergent populations are a thwarted sense of belonging and a sense of burdensomeness. You do not want your children to feel like they are a burden to you. You do not want your children to feel like they don't belong.
Yeah. You want to be accepted as you are.
Absolutely.
That is your role as a parent, to accept your child as they are, to love them, to cherish them, to support them as they are.
So that kind of begs the question, how are neurodivergent children accepted in school? How do they feel like they belong in school?
Can I give you a lovely example? Do you
Give a
want to
lovely
go
example,
first?
then I'll give. Well, the horrible side is when you try and do like National Autism Awareness Week or things like that, and you find kind of the extreme end of the spectrum and then say, this is what all autistic people are like. This is what autism looks like. They cannot cope with anything. When you are giving that sort of thing, where you're literally saying, yeah, autistic people are things you look at and go, oh my God. When you're doing that as a school, you're not helping that person who is on the spectrum, who has a diagnosis, who's doing really well most of the time, but occasionally has that and needs you're not doing anyone any favours.
Can I give
At
you
all.
two lovely examples that will actually
Let's
help?
go lovely.
Let's give people something positive they can actually do, shall we? Because it's kind of, otherwise we're in danger of descending into despair. So the first thing is I can give you a lovely positive example. My son's school enabled him to build a tabletop gaming club.
Love it.
This was an amazing thing. So this is his passion. This is what he loves to do, still loves to do it. And he felt really isolated, really alone. Transition was really difficult for him. A neurodivergent young person with a very complex profile, really interesting profile of strengths and weaknesses, also dyslexic. So some of the whole structure thing that you have in school is not easy for him. So he said, I want to have a tabletop gaming club. And they said, okay. First, brilliant. Thank you for listening. Then they found a place that you could do it in the library. That worked for a little while until they were being bullied in the library for being weird and different. So then they found them a different place to do it. They found them the lab where the sixth formers were doing their practicals and doing their work, because they weren't bothering anybody. They were just sitting quietly in a corner, talking to each other and playing. They were doing no harm, but there was some level of supervision. And they enabled that to happen. And that built those social groups. And that was a positive reason to go to school. That was a reason that made all the things that are difficult, they're being picked on, being bullied, not fitting in, finding some of the learning really difficult, some of it really brilliant, some of it fascinating, some amazing teaching, some horrible experiences, all of the above. That made it doable. And those social structures gave him a peer group. And he is still friends with those people today. He now has groups of people internationally that he talks to because he does international tabletop gaming and has really close friends, the sort of ride or die friends, where if someone's in trouble, they will send people across multiple states to make sure they're okay. That sort of deep, meaningful friendship and connection is so vital. And that started from one school saying, yeah, okay, how can we make that happen?
And it also started from a sense, because, about someone not concentrating necessarily straight on the behaviour, concentrating in this particular case on the socialisation. I go back again to the three pillars: the learning, the behaviour, the learning, the socialisation, and then you pick up what's left, the behaviour. I suppose, just to sort of also throw something into the pot, just to sort of give it some kind of different, sort of not balance so much, but another perspective. Schools are very much, mainstream schools are about compliance. They're about people doing the same thing at the same stage, at the same age. That's how they're geared. The good thing is industry, business, they like innovation. They like things, they like people who are different and stuff, but schools aren't geared for that. Now, there are some problems with resources and staffing. We all know that, but we know that our schools are not set up. They're not flexible. They don't have the flexibility, and they would argue they probably don't have the resources or the people to be able to do that. It's not true in some schools, but in some schools it is true. I'm going back to, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think the fact that one size fits all thing we know just doesn't work. And with the it was the whole idea of inclusion, put everyone in the same, and in theory it should, but in practice it won't. And I think having alternative systems, let's call them not special schools, but alternative learning systems, either they're, attached to or involved with or part of, or, there's a sort of like a match and Mitch thing. This needs to take place, because we're just failing those kids who don't fit the compliance system,
I think I love talking about systems. I've done work on inclusion, and we talk about systemic ableism or racism. And I like to remind people that systems and processes generally have people in them. And at any one moment in time, like in the case of having the tabletop gaming club, or in my son's school, they actually enabled him to play with the children that were a couple of years younger in the smaller playground. So he wasn't exposed to the older kids. He wasn't mocked for, being himself. So he was in an environment that was safe, and he actually now works with younger children. So that was an adaptation that meant he was safe doing what he liked in the school setting. And again, that was down to somebody, a person, making that decision and following it through, so that he knew where he didn't go to playground there, he went there, and all the rest of it. And I think that at some point, as individual school leaders, Senkos, emotional learning support assistants, whatever your role is, you have a role. And I think that the system should enable people to be empowered to make decisions that they feel would assist and support. And I'm strongly of the opinion that they should be able to do that with or without a diagnosis, actually respond to what's happening.
Yes.
And deliver what is needed. Because sometimes I hear this this kind of roadblock, this impasse. Well, we can't do that because they haven't got a diagnosis. And then we get stuck, and then the parent gets stuck because there's, the CAMS waiting lists along, then the child is stuck because they're in this kind of no man's land, and it's your whole identity, and it just falls apart. So I think people being empowered, I think, is a really strong way forward.
It's what I do for a living, quite frankly, is I just remind people they can do that, Susie. It's just, you don't need a diagnosis to have someone work at a different age group, and it's just shifting what we've always done, and just sort of like saying, why can't you? So, but you're right, there's some very small there's a lot of changes you can make that don't cost anything, so to speak. All they need is they need people to start thinking a little bit more flexibly about things like
Think
that.
differently.
But I think the problem is there's a policy, Fintan, and if they don't meet that, they don't meet the criteria for that policy, so we can't do that. So it just comes back to, I think all of this is, we've got to remember that we are all human. We need to be a human being when we're looking at this child, not just using policies. We need to be a human looking at this child who ultimately, in reality, wants to be in school. And behind them are parents who ultimately, even with their things, they generally know being in school is probably the best way, for the best thing for that child. And I think most parents, everyone would agree that the right school for their child, who accepts them as they are and supports them, is the best place to be. So we've got to remember that when we've got a child in front of us who is struggling with attendance, where the parents aren't maybe on the same page as us, we've got to just stop and ask why. Why are they not on this? That child wants to come into a school which accepts them. The parents want their child to come into a school that accepts them. They want that. So if they're not coming into school, it's because you're not accepting them.
There's a little bit more to that, though. I think when you come to that area of why should someone come as a 14-year-old come to school versus not go to school, and there are some families who probably really do need some support when it comes to getting away from the screen versus getting on a bus and in January and going to school. And the thing is that it's what's the incentive? What's the stimulation? What are they going to get out of it, so to speak? And in my experience, a lot of kids, why do they use a screen versus a person? Well, the screen is more stimulating. You're getting more out of it. And the bottom line is that you've got to also, not just an incentive, you've got to make school, you've got to have a reason. School's going to be stimulating. You've got to be able to, bottom line is, you've got to be sort of, they've got to feel as if they're getting something out of it.
I think it's got to be stimulating and it's got to be relevant.
Yeah.
And if I can't see the relevance, perhaps it's not relevant, or perhaps someone hasn't helped me see the relevance of what I'm learning. I am very much of, if I'm not interested, I am not going to learn it. I hate Shakespeare for that reason. There are so many things I hated in school. I found out in secondary school in year 11 that if I just didn't go into school, they wrote a letter home which said at the top, "To the parents and guardians of Dale Pickles." And if all I had to was intercept that letter, my parents had no idea I wasn't in school. So that's all I had to do. And then in college, they never even wrote home. So my attendance got even worse, because if I went to that lesson and I didn't see the relevance of what I was doing, and pure maths has no relevance in the real world, why would I go to that lesson? And that's, for me, the relevance. All I've done since leaving school is non-stop learning. So it's not I don't like learning, I don't like education, is it wasn't relevant or the environment wasn't right. And I think ultimately, if we can get those things right, most other things go away, but it's getting that right, and it really is hard. That's the hardest bit, is what would that look like for neurodivergent children?
I've got a little something. So there's a wonderful thing called self-determination theory. And it's the difference between having a reward system that tells you must do things and you get stickers and you get whatever your certificate is, versus I have the autonomy to choose something. I've chosen to do something. I'm building skills and competence. I'm building a sense of mastery. And it gives me a sense of relatedness, of social connections and caring. If you hit those three things, what you get is motivation. That's intrinsic motivation. That's, I'm doing it because I'm passionate about it. If you take an example of a young person who's passionate about their area of special interest, the thing they love, whether it's football or anime or computer games or whatever it is, having ability to drive that themselves, to have a degree of choice, to be able to build skills and competence and get feedback within a time frame that is developmentally appropriate. So it's not, I'm handing in a piece of work and I may get a mark back in 2 weeks' time. It's I did this, that was brilliant, excellent, I can build on that. It needs to be more immediate, it needs to be faster. And it gives you that social that you need, so you can work out who the hell out you are, who you are, that works really well. Because I was just really struck that the difference between watching my son, who loves learning, is passionate about learning, struggled with school, couldn't drag him away from the things he was passionate about learning, couldn't drag him to the things he hated to learn about. I was going, how can one person be those two different things? And it's all this self-determination theory. It's all around, I have chosen this. This helps me to build my skills, my abilities, and my sense of competence, and therefore confidence and self-esteem. And it gives me that extra social. And you can do that in things like Minecraft. So that's why it's so hard to do it at school, because we're not asking people to do that. We're saying, do this, I'll give you a sticker. Well, stickers become demotivating very quickly.
Years ago, we did coursework, we did projects, we got into something, we got grips on something, we really did it. We got it wrong. We learned, we got passionate, we did stuff, we went on. All my children do are answer 6 mark, 9 mark, 10 mark, 3 mark, 12 mark, 20 mark questions. That's all my children have done. And my daughter is finishing college this year, and it's all she has done for 7 years is learn how to answer exam questions.
Well, as you know, I don't talk a lot about when I'm talking about when I get to behaviour. After I've done the learning and socialisation, I don't really talk about behaviour. I talk about mood. I talk about supporting mood, because I believe mood's the key area. And then to get mood, and it's back to what you said, Sarah Jane, it's motivation. And when you get motivation, then you've got a very different thing. And as you said, there's a guy called there's a TED talk by Dan Pink. It's called Drive, D-R-I-V-E. And he says those 3 things. He says, we don't understand what motivation really is. We think motivation is because if you give someone something, they'll do it again, or they'll do it more. And it's about autonomy, purpose, and mastery. That's what he says. It's about, that's what motivates people. So I think we don't understand that motivation, that area. For some people are very self-motivated. They've got a different, they're different ball game. They're doing it for different reasons. But a lot of neurodivergent children, we just don't understand. We don't understand how to manage and support their mood, and therefore we don't understand, what's going to motivate them in order to, to be, to do that. And actually, one of the other things, my pet thing, is movement. All we're doing is taking care of this part of the body. We're not taking care of the rest of it. They're sitting down too much, and they need more movement. Movement helps you, to motivate.
I've learned that generally, to have a good night's sleep, I need 2 types of being tired. I need to have used my head, and I need to be physically tired. If I spent an entire day doing loads of stuff but not really thinking, my brain will just churn all night long.
Yeah.
If I do the other, where I am busy and flat out in my head and I'm working and I'm thinking, but I'm generally just sitting all day, my body's restless.
Yeah, correct.
You need both.
You're right. You need both. You need to be taking care. This is Ken Robinson. It's not me. He says, "What's the rest of it for? Just to carry this bit around from place to place." We've got to be taking care of the body. If you don't take care of the body, it's a good analogy. Then you're not going to be taking care of the whole person. And that's what we don't do. We sit down, listen to me. It's not going to be motivating.
So school isn't really holistic. It's not meeting our holistic needs in terms of movement, creativity. I think there's a big piece missing around creativity, particularly with neurodivergent learners, all learners. Just as you say, the way that the whole body is engaged. I used to love English lessons because our English teacher was human. She was vulnerable. I remember she used to read poems and cry, or she'd rush out of the room, and so she was emotional, and we found it fascinating. It was just captivating. It was like a live mini performance because she brought her whole self to those lessons. And we had to learn poetry by rote, which again is not everyone's bag. And it didn't really matter if you didn't remember it. It was just because she would be there with us, and she'd be willing us on and so delighted if we got it right and remembered it, and explaining it. She was a technicolor teacher. And I think that going back to this, the system again, I'm not sure that teachers. I see that many teachers like her. I mean, both of my children are in education and teaching, and I have to say, I mean, we've talked a lot about parents and young people around these issues. We haven't talked a lot about teachers. And I think they are tired. They are tired. And I think as a neurodivergent teacher, which I do have also, I don't want to start sharing diagnoses of all my family without their consent. But, I think that sometimes the pressure's on them, because that's another thing. As we know, there were hundreds of thousands of neurodivergent teachers. How are they supported? How are they regulating? How are they able to manage that rigidity? And you talked earlier, Finn, about the pressures and the results and the requirement to sit still and learn and regurgitate information, for exams, and this zero tolerance. How does that work in terms of behaviour? I've sat with a teacher who I could see their discomfort around a reintroduction meeting, because she knew what was going on, but she was saying, "Well, we can't tolerate that. We can't have that in school." And I said, "Well, that's because X, Y, Z. He's autistic. He's ADHD." So that's really difficult to cope with. And so again, the data shows that 2 in 5 teachers now are struggling with their own mental health.
Yeah.
And also, I think schools since COVID are struggling with staff being off sick or whatever is so much higher since COVID than before COVID. I was one of those children who used to get 100% attendance for a whole year, because my mum was a teacher and she made me. No matter what was wrong with me, I was still going in because it's the best place for me. Yeah, no, I don't do that with my children. If they're not feeling great, need a mental health day, they're having a mental health day. That's great. But I think teachers, you look at the teachers, the pressures they are under, and teaching staff. And again, let's go back to your motivation and wanting to be there, is when you want to learn and you're doing something you enjoy, even if you're not feeling great, you still kind of end up trying to do it because you want to. And I think teachers who love teaching and who've loved it, kind of, I've got a bit of a cold, I'm going to battle on. And I just look at teachers throughout life, they battle on. They go in with like legs hanging off, arms in slings, no voice. My mum used to lose her voice, but somehow used to go in and teach. Okay, how are you teaching with no voice? It makes no sense. Take some time off, get your voice. No, she went in. And I think there is a thing of teachers and support staff are kind of losing that because they're not feeling valued or supported in the same way probably the children are. They're having burnout in the same way neurodivergent children are having this burnout. And if staff and children are in the same boat, it's not either of them that's the problem, is it?
So the report said that 2 in 5 newly qualified teachers are experiencing mental health difficulties. And the reasons they describe are things like poor resourcing, inadequate training in early career teachers. So they lack confidence and they're worried about making a mistake. And they want to do a good job. No supervision at lunchtime. And that's also a big area where if there is bullying or things happening, it can be around lunchtime. And then we get that's compounded by supply teachers who may go in who don't know anything about the children. And we've had quite a few experiences where the cause of a child not going in is through an experience they had with a supply teacher who doesn't know them, who hasn't built that relationship with them or understands them. So it's complicated. It's complicated. And I think it's such a shame because there is excellence there. I've seen it. And there is care and compassion there, a lot of it. But somehow the little pockets of brilliance are kind of being drowned out by a bigger rolling beast that's going. And I think there are some wholesale changes that are needed to sort of blow fresh life into the education system. And I think, the ones I see are brilliant teachers, very compassionate, very understanding, and I just hope that they stay.
I think it is worrying the number of teachers who are crashing out. And I think they're crashing out because they're not being supported. Now, coming back to your point earlier, Dale, about this wonderful neurodiversity affirming week and autism awareness week. And actually, I sometimes think the purpose of that is for all of us as whole school systems to say we're allowed to be different people. We're allowed to have different skills. We're allowed to have different profiles. We're allowed to find the accommodations we need for those. And that applies to teachers every bit as much as it applies to pupils. And if we don't have that as a safe place embedded for teachers, we are never going to make it a safe place for pupils. And coming back to that idea of not having the superhuman, I am the super autist, this kind of with the big pants and the cape, it's kind of, no, young people, especially teenagers, want to see somebody who is as like them as possible and thriving.
Which is basically quite normal with a weird quirk that you don't always see, but it's there. But that's the thing, because a lot of the autism, it's an invisible disability, so therefore they should look like everyone else. They just maybe arrange their fork and knife 3 times before they eat their dinner, or the food can't touch. Just a couple of little things you may notice.
As you know, I was a former head teacher myself, and so I was asked. I was going to a school to do a bit of a project with them, and the head teacher was a very sharp, young, I would say, kind of corporate type of individual, and he'd obviously seen me. Someone else had asked me to go in there, so he was kind of like interviewing me, really. And he said to me, so he said, what's my priority, in terms of working with, the neurodivergent children in this school? Or he didn't even ask that, but what's my priority in working with these sorts of issues that you're going to help me with? And I'm thinking, that he's going to say what we need to be doing is, this and that for the children and everything else. And I said, but he caught me a bit unawares. And so sometimes you don't think it through. My instinctive response was straight up. My impulsive response was, you got to take care of your staff. He said to me, what? He said, well, I thought you were going to talk about the children. I said, well, how can you? I mean, it's not rocket science. How can you, get the best out for your children unless you take care of your staff? You got to take care of your staff.
Well, that's the same here. I take care of my team. My team take care of the customers. I don't take care of my customers.
It's not rocket science. You've got to take care of your staff. And if your systems aren't working, and therefore the staff stress is being caused by the result of whatever is going on, if you can't just if you said that's this motivation thing. I don't think anyone they don't go into education for money. We know that they go in for different reasons. And you've got to make them feel that they want to go to work. And that means they are being valued and being taken care of, and their voices are being listened to. All right, you're not going to get it right with everyone all the time, but they need to feel as if their voice is being heard. And back to NQTs, I do think it is different. I mean, we talk about, I think they're under a lot of pressure. They won't, it's very hard for them to go off piste to take, things, because they are so, I think, so tied, if you like, to what are the principles and they're not experienced enough to know that by going off you have to be able to, you get things done. So I think there's something definitely in their teacher training that needs to change, quite frankly. But you've got to take care of your staff. It is the number one priority.
If you two think of your favourite teachers when you were a kid, you don't say anything, but I guarantee they were the slightly eccentric, passionate ones who made you love that subject. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. They were the ones, they weren't the average, they weren't the policy followers. They weren't the ones who did everything by the book. They're the ones who maybe slightly skipped that page of what you shouldn't do in the science lab, or were the whatever. But they're the ones who made you passionate. They're the ones who got you into whatever you're into. And again, with education, that's what we seem to be getting rid of in teaching. And with White Rose Maths, it can, and all the other stuff, it can be very much teach by numbers.
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, there's lots of, we I think we could be talking for days and days and days. We never sort it out. There's lots of challenges, but there's also lots of opportunities. And I always go back to the fact that I think we have had some huge pressures and the COVID thing is a massive change in terms of how our whole society reacted to that. We have some developmental issues just on the basis of where we're reaching today. I think we also have to understand that to a certain extent, we do have the technology now. We are moving towards ways of possibly having a different way of schooling people, be it some hybrid system between home and school, or between a different ratio of how much time they spend in groups versus how much time they might spend individually. So I think the future does offer us some opportunities as well to try and meet the needs of everybody, but maybe in a more sort of in a more way.
I do think that with technology, and going back to like children and technology, is we're expecting them to use technology responsibly, yet most of us adults can't use it responsibly. We don't know what we should or shouldn't be doing. We don't know what's good for our mental health because we're not really paying attention, yet we're expecting our children to be not using it and not doing that. So we still got, I think, a long way to go with tech as a society on how we use it. And you talked earlier, Fintan, about like the hidden curriculum. And there is a whole huge hidden curriculum around tech that isn't actually being taught by anyone. And people find a way, and typically in an unhealthy way, they do the unhealthy stuff and they come out the other side going, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. But they kind of go on that journey on their own, and it generally leaves a lasting impression in a negative way on that person for them to come out the other side. And so I know some families who literally avoid all tech as much as possible. And they do, if you look at them, they do seem the healthier families. But that is a whole family thing, not just the children.
So I think we need to start educating people to live in the current world that we're in.
Yes.
And to take the blame out of the system, please, and start focusing on finding solutions that will enable us all to end up as fully functioning, happier, possibly, hopefully, adults that are competent, capable, and able.
Definitely. And I'm going to wrap it up because we have been talking for a really long time. So thank you, Suzy, Fintan and Sarah Jane for coming on the show today. And as always, we'll be putting some links to things we mentioned. So I'll be putting links to get hold of Suzy, Fintan and Sarah Jane. I'm going to find that Walk in the Shoe, My Shoes link that Sarah Jane mentioned and have that in there as well, and probably throw some other stuff in there. So thank you for listening to the show. If you haven't subscribed already, click on that subscribe button wherever you're listening, and you can follow us on various social media on Twitter or X, at the Sendcast, on Facebook, the Sendcast, on Instagram, the Sendcast. And every time I say X, everyone also laughs because it's just a horrible name. But if you're struggling to show progress, if your assessment process is overcomplicated, takes too long, or you just want to see what's available, have a look at the B Squared website or book a free online meeting with me so I can take you through our products. We have a range of assessment products to help all schools show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And if you're a school in England still confused by the engagement model, not sure about the pre-key stage standards or anything else around assessment, including how much progress should children with SEND make, get in contact. You can find out about our online training, our CPD, read our blog or watch our webinars. It is all on the B Squared website. And you'll find a link to the website and to book a meeting with me in the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening to the 200th episode of the Sendcast, which is phenomenal. And it literally started 4.5 years ago with a conversation with Sarah Jane at the TES show.
It was a while ago.
It seems like a very long time ago. Just 6 months before COVID, we had a conversation. I had no idea where this was going to go, and I am so happy it has gone where it's gone. And I have no idea where it's going next, but that's the fun part.
Onwards and upwards, Dale. Onwards and upwards.
So thank you for listening. We'll be back with another 200 episodes in the next couple of years. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.